Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service. Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service. Let's look at the history of Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service. Now, broadcasting started in Nigeria in 1933 with the establishment of Empire Service of the British Broadcasting Corporation, and that was in Lagos. It was first established as Radio Distribution Service before now being changed to Radio Diffusion System, and then it kept improving until the National Broadcasting Service (NBS) was established in 1951, and that was following the recommendation of the Turner Byron Committee, which was set up to look into how to develop broadcasting in Nigeria. So broadcasting began with radio before television came on board, and that was in 1959 with the setting up of Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service. But our interest here is Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service. So which area did the Eastern region cover at that time when the Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service first came on board? In the First Republic, the Eastern region was made up of the present Southeast and some parts of Southern states of Nigeria, particularly Rivers State, Cross River State, Bayelsa, and Akwa Ibom states. The region was carved out from the Southern Nigeria Protectorate in 1954. The region was officially divided in 1967 into 3 new states: the East Central State, Rivers State, and Southeastern State. Of course, the East Central State had its capital at Enugu, which is now the capital of the present Enugu State. The Eastern region then had an ethnically diverse population. It had the 3rd, 4th, and 5th largest indigenous ethnic groups in Nigeria, which are Igbo, Ijaw, and Ibibio. So how did regional broadcasting start in Nigeria? Regional broadcasting in Nigeria began in 1953 at an event that took place in Western Region Parliament, where the leader of Former Action Group, Obafemi Awolowo, had criticized the newly introduced Macpherson Constitution. The British Governor General at that time, Sir John Macpherson, was not happy with that criticism, so he went to the ENBS and made a broadcast in defense of the Constitution. During that broadcast, he expressed unhappiness over Awolowo's criticism of the Constitution and accused him of being unfaithful. Awolowo decided to defend himself and went to MBS to react to comments of the Governor General. But the MBS denied him the right to reply, which led to agitation for autonomous broadcasting system in Nigeria, which will have stations that are independent of federal government control. That was how the Macpherson Constitution permitted the regions to establish their own broadcasting stations, and then broadcasting moved to the concurrent list. That is, it was to be operated by both the federal and regional governments. As a result, the Western Nigeria government established a radio station in May 1960 after it had established the first television station in Africa, Western Nigeria Television, WNTV, in 1959. Both the radio and television stations of the Western region were established under the auspices of Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service, WNBS, which was launched in 1959. Other regions followed in the development of broadcasting stations. In 1960, the Eastern Nigeria government established Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service, ENBS, which had radio and television stations. In 1962, Northern Nigeria government established Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria, BCNN, which had radio and television stations. So our interest here is ENBS, Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service. Now let's look closely at Eastern Nigeria Broadcasting Service. The ENBS was established on the day Nigeria gained independence, and that's 1st October 1960. Both radio and television stations took off at the same time. It was called ENBS Radio Television. The office complex of ENBS was located at ACB Building, Ogui Road, Enugu, when the establishment was first launched, before it was moved to its permanent site at Independence Layout, where Nigeria Television Authority (NTA) is currently located. At inception, the ENBS radio system comprised 1 recording and 1 continuity studio at ACB Building, Ogui Road, Enugu, with 1 medium wave and 1 shortwave transmitter. The ENBS television was made up of a 2-camera studio and control room, 1 television room with a 100 watts television transmitter. The radio system had a medium wave and shortwave transmitter at the hilltop Ngwo. near Enugu, and FM link relayed signal from the ACB building to the transmitter. The TV channel of ENBS originally had a 100-watt transmitter which could only cover Enugu Capital Territory, but a 6-kilowatt transmitter was installed at Obohil, Aba, and then the whole eastern Nigeria and beyond were satisfactorily covered by the station. This then gave credence to the station's foundation slogan, which is second to none in the whole Africa. The foundation slogan of ENBS is second to none. In terms of organizational structure, the ENBS had a general manager in charge of the establishment with 2 separate managers for radio and television stations. Of course, the 2 stations had the conventional departments of broadcast stations such as administrative department, news and current affairs department, programs department, engineering and accounts or marketing departments, and the heads of these departments reported to the manager of each station, who then reported to the general manager. In terms of programming, the ENBS had both local and network programs. The local programs reflected the character of the region in terms of culture and interests of the audiences within the areas that made up the region. The network programs were relayed from Lagos, which was the headquarters of the federal government-owned radio and television stations. Then there was Radio Nigeria, also called Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, FRCN, which was an offshoot of Nigeria Broadcasting Corporation, NBC. The ENBS radio, for instance, hooked up to Radio Nigeria Lagos at 7 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., 7 p.m., and 9 p.m. for network news. After each network news, there was an Igbo version of the network news, as was the practice at that time by regional stations. Apart from news, there were other network drama and current affairs programs which the NBS hooked up to and broadcast to the audience members in the region. Such programs as The Village Headmaster, which was later recognized as The New Village Headmaster, and The Masquerades, later recognized as The New Masquerades, were programs enjoyed by the audiences of ENBS in Eastern Region. There were also very interesting local programs aired by ENBS Radio, among which are Good Night Melodies and Peoples in Highlight, a current affairs program. The Eastern Nigeria Television was also noted for local news and current affairs programs, musical programs, including drama series, one of which was Ichioku, which later became a national program. After the Nigerian Civil War broke out in 1967, the ENBS suffered setbacks. Both the radio and television stations were inherited by the breakaway Republic of Biafra. As the war intensified, both the radio and television stations of ENBS stopped operating conventionally, but the radio station, which had become Radio Biafra, continued operating as underground radio station used as a propaganda tool of Biafra during the war period. Before the capital of Biafra, Enugu, fell to the Nigerian forces, both the radio and television stations of Eastern Region, which had become Biafra Radio and Television, were functioning. They provided reports about the war for the audience, but served more as propaganda tools for the Biafra administration. At the end of the Civil War in 1970, the Eastern Regional Government returned and immediately commenced the radio station, but the television station took a while to resume. This was basically because of the disruptions and destructions of the station and its studio during the war, including lack of funds to refurbish the studio. The ENBS, earlier converted to Radio TV Biafra during the war, became the East Central State Broadcasting Service, ECBS, following the creation of the new East Central State in 1966. The station still had its headquarters in Enugu. As more states were carved out of the Eastern Region, the ENBS was gradually dismantled and transformed into other stations that served the needs of the new states. The process of splitting and transformation into new stations began with the creation of 12 states by the General Yakubu Gowon-led military administration in 1967. In May 1967, Gowon announced the division of the 4 Nigerian regions, Northern, Eastern, Western, and Midwestern regions, into 12 states. 3 states were carved out of the Eastern Region. They are East Central State, Rivers State, and Cross River State. The East Central State inherited what was then the ENBS radio and television stations. The station then transformed to East Central State Broadcasting Service, ECBS, radio and television stations. In 1976, the East Central State was divided into Anambra and Imo states. By this time, the federal government led by General Olusegun Obasanjo, had taken over all television stations of the various states and operated them centrally. The ENBS TV, which had become ECBS TV, became NTA Enugu in 1978. This was after promulgation of Decree 24 in May 1977 by the then government of Olusegun Obasanjo, which gave birth to Nigeria Television Authority (NTA). This was how the regional broadcasting stations were taken over by the federal government. That was after they had been split into several states that were created. But in 1979, broadcasting was returned to the concurrent list, meaning that the states were again permitted to operate radio and television stations. That was after a civilian administration took over from the army. The East Central Broadcasting Service was then split by the two states, Anambra and Imo, which were carved out of the East Central State. The head office of the ENBS in Enugu, which had become East Central State Broadcasting Service, was taken over by Anambra State and converted to Anambra Broadcasting Service (ABS). Radio Nigeria office in Onitsha was handed over to Anambra State government in 1979 and it became Anambra Broadcasting Corporation (ABC). Radio 2 Onitsha in 1982. This was how the ENBS transformed into ECBS and then to various states that make up the southeastern states today.